and welcome to this special panel discussion as part of the European Safer Gambling Week 2025. Before we tuck into the session, I do want to congratulate the excellent team at the EGBA, who are the people behind this very important initiative. I hope everyone has been enjoying the seminars and the webinars and the events and sessions throughout the week. As with anything, they've saved the best till last, and today's discussion is all about the frontline experiences of safer gambling staff, and I'm delighted to be joined by four incredible professionals who work at the very heart of safer gambling. So starting with Sean, I'm just going to go round, get you to introduce yourselves with a brief background of your experience of safer gambling before handing over the baton to whoever you wish. So Sean, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So hi, my name is Sean Burke. I've worked in the gambling industry 15, 16 plus years now. I'm now working at the intersection of coaching, neuroscience and human performance. So my passion for safer gambling is more rooted in the first-hand experiences, having worked both on the shop floor and online with teams. I've seen how intense these conversations can be. My focus in this area is now helping teams develop basically the emotional strength and grounded presence needed to support customers safely and sustainably. But that's me in a nutshell. I'll pass on to Maris, who's next on my screen.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Maris. I've been in the industry since 2009 and formally started in RG in 2011. I spent 13 years at Unibet and Kindred and FDJ. And then I stopped for a bit to be a freelance consultant, which I really enjoyed because I was doing quite a different project, and I worked as well with research on substance use. And now I'm the Director of Player Sustainability at Leo Vegas. And I would hand over to Kieran.
Hello everyone, my name is Kieran. I'm currently a freelance safer gambling consultant and subject matter expert. I started in the industry at the same year as Maris in December 2009. And for the majority of my time, I worked for Frontier Poker and PokerStars until I left the industry to go out freelance in 2023. And I will give over to Fraser, please.
Hi, I'm Fraser McNaughton. I'm currently the head of compliance and group MLRO at Grace Media. I've spent about 8 years in the industry, which turns out I'm the baby. I've worked in the retail and online environment, quite similar to Sean. I'm specialised in safer gambling for the most of it. The last year or so, my role as head of compliance has been developing commercially effective compliance solutions and strategies, with my main aim being to minimise the number of people harmed whilst maximising profitability.
Excellent. So then that leaves me. So my name's Jim. I am a charity lottery operator, and I am really passionate about ethical gambling and making gambling safe, secure and socially balanced for everyone. So big thank you to all four of you for joining the panel today. And just as an overview, today's conversation is structured around three critical areas. First, we're going to explore real-world experiences, the stories and encounters that our panelists have first-hand experience of when working with individuals across the entire spectrum of specialist gambling, insight and gambling-related harms, and safer gambling, of course. And this is going to be a really interesting part of the conversation because I always feel that these narratives and stories often reveal a lot of truths and insights that statistics and numbers alone cannot capture. We're then going to move it on to the second part of the conversation, and that's all to do with turning the lens inward and looking at and discussing the support for safer gambling staff themselves. We'll be asking them their experiences of resources and support systems and the care packages. And we'd be asking what it looks like in practice, but also what it should be looking like moving forwards. And then finally, the last part of this conversation is all to do with what the world looks like in 2013. What does safer gambling look like 5 years from now? And what changes do our panelists hope to see, both realistically and pragmatically? and optimistically, I guess, and what they're all working towards. So that's the brief overview of the panel that we'll be discussing today. So let's begin. Sean, I'm not going to you first because I'm going to pick on you all the time. But you just mentioned something that is really resonated with the first part of this, and you were talking about the intense conversations that Safer Gambling staff have. Can you share a moment or a conversation or sort of like your thoughts on what fundamentally changed how you approach working in Safer Gambling and what those stories and intense conversations were?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we did quite a few training with different providers, especially with lived experience and a few other advanced workshops. And a lot of the time, having conversations was quite enlightening, was hearing the experiences of the people on the front line. So, for example, they may have a distressing call, which is not, unusual for them. But in these sessions where they really had a space to open up about these calls and these kind of high intensity calls, it's the impact that they were taken away from it. So at first, it was normalized to them because the calls can be so frequent, but those sessions revealed how they were taking those conversations home sometimes, or where they were thinking about going to certain events, or whether it was, well, what is this week going to look like? And you didn't realize that gradual toll that it's taken, and realizing that, well, what do we have in place for that? What are we not doing right to stop or have a cutoff where they have some place where they can unload that and not take it home with them? And what can we do about that long term? So it really began to shift our perspective. We need to do a little bit more to deal with that element.
Kieran, is that something you would share?
Yeah. So, as I said, and as Jim, and my background was as a single person business unit for years and years in PokerStars. And the way to sort of handle the workload and the casework I found was to find other positive distractions outside of it. The first real case that sort of resonated with me and changed the way I looked at things was just after the UK license launched from 2024, the tail end of 24. And I was dealing with a female customer. Now, obviously, I won't give real world data, that's personal. But she contacted looking for help because of her concerning comments, and her behavior was sort of spiraling because of her personal affairs and personal life. So she's using poker as an escape. So obviously that's concerning. People use gambling for escapism, and at the time I was still pretty young and new to it. So over the couple of weeks and forward and back, we had a very real and very frank conversation, and some places vulnerable conversation, and which that lady confided in me an awful lot, things I didn't expect to get from a customer. And we had a very, very frank and very honest backwards and forward. And in the end, after engaging with her about her gameplay, about her spending behaviors and what it illustrated, she decided that she wanted to continue playing, but she didn't want to play for real money. So she wanted to just be a play money player because it was the financial side that she was worried about more so. Like, she still enjoyed poker, but it was to just be a safe, relaxing escape from her life. And what struck out to me was just how honest people can be when someone actually listens to them. I think that was different. That was definitely what surprised me when I first started getting into serious type of gambling cases, was how much more engaged you need to be with the customer rather than just template responses. So that was the first real case that resonated about OG and changed the way I looked at safer gambling strategy. Because beforehand, I understood that it was customer service, a special type of customer service, but these people started to really, really confide and tell you the deepest, darkest personal affairs, which you're not really trained for, or there wasn't any training for back then. So Sean said, how do you prepare not to take this stuff home with you? And it took me years to find a balance whereby leisure just at work.
Fraser, you mentioned that you're the baby of the group with your 8 years experience. I did want to counter that and just say, I've got 2. I'll take that, and I've got the baby-like hairdo to complement it. But just with regard to sharing those stories and experiences, did you have frontline experience of taking calls from people on the safer gambling front? And can you remember your first memorable experience that left you a little bit, I don't know, shaken or?
Yeah, so I've got experience from interacting with customers kind of face to face, doing serious safer gambling and threat of harm interventions in a face to face environment, as well as on calls. So it was a bit of a rough wake up call when I had to do the first one. But I think the one that really left a mark on me wasn't even a call that I took. It was one of my colleagues at this company took a call where it was actually a manager of a betting shop who had made some made some comments to a customer about his gambling, and he had laughed on his way out of the shop and said, "If this bet doesn't come in, I'm just going to kill myself." And it's a conversation that really resonated with me because she phoned up in pieces half an hour after this customer had left because she had had this moment's thought where she was just like, what if he does? And the last thing I did was laugh at him. In these situations, it's so difficult. Like Sean said, it's so difficult sometimes to bring yourself down from that intensity. And it led to quite a few of us when we were taking these harder calls, these harder conversations, to really reflect on how much it was affecting our mental health and how much it was slightly changing us as people. And I mean, upwards of tens, if not 100, threat of harm calls at this point into my career. I found myself becoming almost numb to it, which is quite difficult to help people and to make sure that they get the support that they need and deserve when you're becoming so burnt out from it that you can't feel it yourself. And I think something that we don't do as an industry well enough is look after our own people and train our own people how to handle these situations. I know Kieran wrote an article quite recently about the fact that he was the one man band that was dealing with it at one of his previous employers. And I think that resonates for me as well. I think that there's always that one person that steps up more than others and carries more of that burden. And I think we as senior safer gambling experts need to recognize that within our own teams and see who is carrying that burden and just try and look after them as best as possible and give them the coaching they need.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll revisit that point. So I'll make you the first point of contact for the second part of this conversation. I'm going to bring the doc in, the academic. Maris, can you give me some sort of idea of the common themes and patterns that trend within these stories of people seeking support when it comes to gambling related harm?
I think what Kieran said really resonated, to be honest, because when I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking, will I remember all the things that I went through and how can I recall all these things? And just talking about, that first call, I still get the almost sweaty hands remembering it. It's really weird though, because it's been I think it was 2011 where I had just started building this marker of harm system. And yeah, as you can imagine, 2011, I wasn't the most popular person to do something like this because there wasn't really any laws and regulation to really assist with markers of harm. And responsible gambling calls weren't a thing. So it wasn't something which was very common. So I remember, because everyone thought I was mentally unstable to even suggest it, I was doing the calls myself. And I still remember one case where I called this customer. It wasn't a lot that he was playing, but I could see there was chasing losses. And I just called and I just said, listen, I'm the RG manager at Unibet and I'm just checking in. And he just opened up so much. I wasn't ready for it. Now, having in mind that I was already trained to be a psychologist at this point, but it was so humbling. He told me everything. He told me how he had his intention of suicide. He told me all these things that he was going through. And to reflect to what the others are saying, was I ready? I think I was in my early 20s or mid 20s. What am I getting myself into? And I couldn't really resort to anyone at that point because it was kind of, it's your job. So it wasn't something obviously I had friends and colleagues that cared, but it was a bit of a shocker of going through these. And I still remember every evening I carried them with me. So even if I had the training and everything not to, I carried them with me, especially when the gamblers were my age. So that was really, really difficult to hear, for example, a 25-year-old going through this. And I think to go to your question, when it comes to common themes, there's always like common themes when you look into the account, in my opinion. You can always see some markers of harm. You can always see some chasing losses. You can always see some exhaustion when it comes to finances. And I think with gamblers, the first thing they think about is that, the finances. Then they start realizing, for example, the time that maybe was spent or that they neglected other areas in their life. But I don't know if the others saw this, but most of the time, the first thing they think about is how can I get the money back that I lost? So almost that's the main theme that the customer is looking for. And most of the time, all they want to hear from the operator is, we can give you a refund, which we cannot, obviously. So I think it's, when it comes to the biggest theme that I saw, and I think it's one of the biggest burdens, is that the anxiety and the humility that the person is going through. And they open up so much to the person, which is quite humbling and almost scary, because you start realizing, for them to open up with someone who's working with an operator, maybe I am the last person that they will speak to. And I think that's quite difficult to carry.
Thank you for that, Maris. That was quite a powerful description of the roles that people face. Does anyone have an experience of, in a similar vein, obviously we're talking about people who have those markers, but what about the affected others? Did anybody ever have any experience of talking to a partner of somebody? And just jump in if you want to start it off.
Yeah, I'll go. So I've had a few conversations like this, but one that stands out to me. I had a customer outside of the UK market, whose wife phoned me, and it was quite a difficult conversation to get started with, because there was all the GDPR hang-ups and the understanding if you have the authority to speak on behalf of this customer and all the rest of it. So it took a good 5 or so minutes to get round to the main bones of the conversation. And by that point, this lady was distraught. You know, the husband had emptied their personal savings account, their joint funds account, and I think sometimes we forget that affected others are indeed affected too. And what I mean by that is, it's easy, particularly in an online environment, to see your customer as data points, a human within their own right when you're having a safer gambling interaction with them, but data points otherwise. And when you start to see this wider ripple effect of gambling harm, this woman or children who are being impacted by what was quite significant level of gambling at the time. And every single time we had a safer gambling interaction with this gentleman, was just, everything was, all the right boxes being ticked. He seemed to be quite open and honest with us until his wife took over, and she had his permission. He was sitting there obviously quite upset himself, and the whole way she explained it, he basically deconstructed their entire lives. Now, this isn't I don't think this is a particularly uncommon theme, particularly with people with severe gambling addiction. But it's so easy to forget about the affected others.
Mm-hmm. Sean?
Yeah, for me, there's an experience that I'll never forget. This is going way back now, when I used to work on the shop floor, maybe 2008. We had a customer that used to come in all the time. We knew him very well. And he was one of those, who just plays the lotteries, the dogs, and it was like £1, £2 bets. That's all he did all day. And then he came in one particular day and he was doing £10, £20, £30 bets. So we're like, we knew that this wasn't normal for him. We knew this was a spike. But it was, what's going on? You're in the money today. What's all these big bets? And he's like, yeah, I've been doing good. He kind of played it off. Okay, this continued all day. Ended up losing a significant amount of money that day, obviously. I think up to £600 basically by the end of the day. He came in the morning. By the end of the day, he lost about £600. Obviously, no RG training whatsoever back then. 2008, we're talking. And then he came up to the desk and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I was like, what's going on? What do you mean? his wife's sister had passed away abroad, and his wife had given him that money to go to the travel agent. This is before, online booking, to go and book the flights so they could go to the funeral. And he'd lost all the money in that day. And I remember thinking all at that time with my zero chance, thinking, why would you do that? I had no recollection, no understanding of the issue that he had, what is his experience. I'm just like, what a stupid thing to do. Why wouldn't you just go and get the tickets? And that haunts me, over the years as I've been educated on what gambling harm is and what it looks like. And just, we saw him after that, and, his wife had thrown him out after that, understandably, because she didn't understand why he would do that as well. So I even saw some of the repercussions of his actions and, what happened after that. And it was really shocking and eye-opening to see what people can do. But yeah, with the retrospective, what should have been done from our side, from the shops, and what training should have been in place. I'm just happy that awareness has increased significantly since then, that the trainers have increased significantly since then, and hopefully now something like that wouldn't happen in front of people's faces.
And Kieran, have you got anything to close this section off with?
Yeah, I've contacted and engaged with husbands, wives, sons, daughters, guestmates, housemates of the existing legend. But one that's a bit different was there was a guy around 2015, I think, and he contacted him and his business partner. Two lads, they opened up the small electricians business together, and his business partner had cleaned out the accounts, completely cleaned out the business accounts of it. And he was emailing him, basically said the user in question had just up and left, didn't come in one day, home disconnected, so just headed off to the Four Corners. And this gentleman was then left with the reality that not only had the business accounts been wiped out by his partner gambling, but that they had a number of guys working for them as well. And he was now facing the reality of seeing these people, his employees, and having to come to them saying, they have nothing to pay you guys with, I'm sorry, through all this fault. And obviously, as Fraser pointed out, there is a GDPR and there's a data protection here, plus the personal responsibility that you need to attach to the customers, that you can't give out other people's details, no matter how much empathy you have for the situation. But that was a real startling one. That was the first time, like, I've had relations and I've had people who are family and so on and so forth. But it's the first time I'd ever had someone whose livelihood had been completely blown up by someone else's gambling, and through a series of emails and going back and forth. Obviously, there's not a whole lot, if we're being completely honest, with limitations to what can be done. But trying to explain to this guy that, we are incredibly sorry and anything we can do, and then trying to steer him to, unfortunately, you must accept that your best friend has potentially stolen from you. Yes, it is addiction. It's horrible that it's happening. But the reality and the harrowing emails this gentleman was sending in about the fact that his livelihood, business him and his friend had built over years, the people that employed him. And my heart went out to him, because wasn't it the harm he was feeling? It was the knock-on effect to the people who worked for them, and then their families, and so on and so forth. So it's not directly an immediate order, but it's one that will always stand out to me. And it's the way it caused me to change the way I look at people's behaviors completely. Like, it's not just you, it's not just your immediate loved ones. It could be your housemate, it could be the guy next door to you. The fact that we all have responsibilities for somebody else. So that's the one that stands out.
Okay.
If I may add to that, sometimes I have to keep in mind that the employees may be affected others as well. It's not the first time that, and we're not just talking about gambling addiction. Addiction is so vast. And so you'll have sometimes employees that might have had partners who went through a disorder. And obviously the same feelings might come up as well. I remember when I joined the industry, I thought to myself, I'll just do it for 2 years and leave. Because I thought at the time, for sure, like, I just need money for my master's, and that's it then. I'll just leave this hell, to be fair. And affected others for me were always very, very sensitive because I remember growing up, I had a relative who had a gambling problem. And I remember the impact that it can have. And I remember how it can really hurt the people around this person, especially when that person doesn't want to change. And there's constantly that trust that they will change and then they don't. And you start seeing even the anger in other relatives. And I always remember I used to keep this letter that the affected other, who would be my grandmother, had written to me. So every time I was working in the beginning, I used to just always remember this letter. And I think one of the days that really destroyed me was when I got a letter from a wife of a customer. And she sent photos of her family and wrote underneath, "These were the happy days that you destroyed." And obviously, I could understand from her perspective. I'm really being a downer to this podcast. I'm so sorry. I remember like seeing that paper and thinking to myself, is it really worth what I'm doing? Is it really making a difference? Am I going to really make a difference to one gambler? For every gambler, we know there's like 20 people impacted. And I think affected others should be so much more a focus point. Even when I did a research paper recently where I interviewed the wives of someone who had an online gambling disorder. And when you hear what they've been through without placing a single bet, but the repercussions, how they had to change from being a wife to almost sometimes like the caregiver, the budget holder, everything, trying to build that trust again, it's just too much.
I think something we've touched a lot on, like financial harm here. I think something that strikes me that we haven't really touched on is the time-based harm. I remember just very, very briefly, sorry. When I still worked in betting shops, I had a regular customer who would always be in kind of between 1 p.m. and 2:30ish, and he would always leave. And one day he was there, and I think he was there until about 3:30, quarter to 4, and this woman bursts into the shop, searching in all the gaming cubicles, finally finds him and just bodily drags him out of it. And she shouts over at me and she says, "He didn't come and pick the kids up from school. Do not ever let him in here again." And that, now that I'm a father, just really resonates with me in terms of how much time I've wasted engaging in whatever, video gaming, gambling, whatever it might be, and just how much time-based harm that could have potentially caused if it had become an addiction. And I think sometimes when we really, really hyperfixate on the grander financial harms, we miss out on sometimes what really matters and what really destroys a family, which is just not being present.
Mm. Sean, I'm going to ask you just a quick question here. And in my naivety, because I pretty do much, even though I work within the lottery sector, I do feel I'm a little bit of an outsider and I don't have this sort of intimate day-to-day knowledge of safer gambling and in the larger operators. Could you give me some idea of sort of like the blend of calls that you'll be taking? Because I think we've covered quite a lot of the severe, maximum impact calls. But can you give me like a rough idea percentage-wise of how many would be moderate, mild or severe cases that you deal with on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, happy to say that the very extreme cases were on the lower percentage. Let's say in a month, it might be 1 to 3%. But when they are very distressful, they could be quite severe. Like a lot of the stories that we've heard already today from Fraser, from Marriage, like they can be quite bad. But they're not, it's not like 100 a day. During my time, working in the industry, obviously over that time, we were making more calls as we start to focus more on the safer gambling interactions and trying to identify people sooner before they got to that point. So most of the calls are now us trying to contact customers ahead of time because we've started to see some of the markers of harm, some stuff starting to shift, some stuff starting to spike. Okay, let's just have a call to touch base. and see if we can have these conversations sooner rather than later, versus all the calls coming in from customers that are now disgruntled or upset or experiencing some type of harm. So I would say, because the markers are quite wide, and there's always more research on it, which ones we should focus on more or not. It did fluctuate. We were always trying to adjust what our algorithms did, what we tried to identify. But I'd say the moderate percentage was more on the 20% maybe scale, and we would always cast the net a little bit wider, because we don't want to get them when they're at moderate or when they are, extreme. We're casting it, the parameters a little bit wider so we can get them beforehand. So even that percentage would probably lower. So a lot of them are in the earlier stages and the mild intervention streams, and most of the calls coming in are, oh, I have an issue with this, I didn't mean to get this, but it's more technical calls that we're getting versus, oh, I've lost everything, I need my money, I'm going to commit suicide, etc. But, though the numbers, that percentage might seem low for the extreme ones, it's just that how impactful those calls are and how it can kind of disrail someone's whole day, someone's whole week, because it was so quite in depth and because they don't have any measures to let go of that or to unpack that with someone or to let go of that before they go home, for example. So now it's rolling into the rest of the month, etc.
Thanks. Kieran, just on that point, and I'll move it on to the second part, because I think quite a few of you have touched on it, just in terms of the support and the care packages that could be in place for safer gambling staff in themselves. It's important that they are looked after as well. Just with regard to when you first started working in the industry, what sort of level of support did operators offer safer gambling staff in terms of dealing with a day where, as Sean put it, you'd get derailed completely?
So I like to think of it, there's two phases there, without deviating from this, the two phases. There's before the Black Friday event, which changed my background and changed iGaming completely. So before that, there was nothing. The operator I worked for, this is 2009, 2009, there was very little care, very little interest for the incident. And that's not to be malicious, that's not to be derogatory to my supervisors. But no one knew about RG, as Maris pointed out earlier. It was a very abstract concept. So if you had a harrowing case to deal with, it was just go have a cigarette or, stand up from your desk, take 10 seconds and go take the next call. Post Black Friday, at least in my experience, I went on to then join a very serious, well-established safer gambling team. And even though I was one person in the office, I was part of a global team. And a lot of it did revolve you just having to take it on the chin and, rub yourself down and get on to the next case. But there was instances whereby my manager would reach out to me, despite the time difference, and sit down and have a very formal conversation with me, asking how things are going. And that's sort of it. It was very ad hoc. There wasn't anything really set in stone. It was a case of, I got 24, 25 when we were doing this, and I just had to find it for myself. I'm happy to say it's completely different now. Sean's work, Peters, hit on it, Maris knows very well. There are definitely support groups. There's definitely the infrastructure there to help staff. But for a very long time, at least in my instance, it was, you just had to find a way to deal with it yourself. I wish I could give you a better answer to that.
No, that's fine.
That kind of was it. I'm lucky I had a very understanding partner and a very, very large music library that helped me get through it. That was really it. You just had to find a way.
That's great. Fraser, you were nodding in agreement with Kieran, so I presume that your experiences were very similar, even though, have you worked in the poker industry as well, or a completely different field?
I've barely touched the poker industry. I think there was a little bit of poker industry when I was in my first online operator. I think you see some fairly wild cases, but they were a tiny fraction of what I've ever dealt with.
Maris, just in terms of your role at the moment and the other operators that you've worked for previously, can you give me some sort of overview of support that they offer safer gambling staff in the various operators you work with?
If I go back to when I started, I don't think there was really much support. So in the beginning, it was not really a lot of support. Nowadays, a lot of companies have employee assistance programs as well, where you can get, for example, any support groups or therapy that can help you through this. Trying to actually pilot something right now where I can do like monthly sessions for the team members that work with me, because I think there's this thing when you do a call, which is very difficult, when your job gets a bit too much, you kind of think, but this is the job. So you might not entirely think that you need help. I don't know if it's just me, maybe I'm stubborn, but at a certain point, you're like, okay, I had a tough call. I need to just manage it and that's it. But nowadays there's much more awareness. I think it's more trying to get the people who work in safer gambling to understand that it's okay to go for help and that it's okay to seek help. Because sometimes I do realize that some of them, almost similarly to what was mentioned before, that we might think, like you become numb to it. So like you might not need to seek help. So even if the help is currently available, maybe we should increase awareness that, it can happen to anyone, and not just safer gambling people, anyone working with customers, any customer facing role can have a really tough call.
Mm. Sean, you sort of touch across different industries at the moment with your safer gambling and coaching, and it's just something that Kieran mentioned about having a really good manager. And a lot of the time with support and care, a lot of operators or any businesses can put together a process, can lay down a system to support staff. But at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to just having a lot of very good human beings who are, concerned for their colleagues and passionate and want to support them. So I guess the human aspect is the most important thing, right, Sean?
Yeah, 100%. That has to be the foundation of any support system. Just being human focused. And Marius touched on some very interesting points there. That feeling that, oh, this is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to handle this. This is very common among humans. Again, we are adults working in an industry that this is the job requirements, and you think this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to deal with. And when you think about it, this is how we are in life most of the time. Especially when I talk to males, that element of, well, I'm supposed to do this. I'm the man, for example, but this is something that applies to all humans. You feel like this is what I've been tasked to do. If I ask for support, what are they going to think of me? I should just be able to manage this. I should be, I'm grown up, all of these silly beliefs that we've grown up with. We take this into this type of role. So not only we are now dealing with life and all it throws at us and not really feeling like we can deal with it, but dealing with it alone. And then now we have a job where as humans, we're naturally empathetic. We can't help but feel what people are experiencing. We can't help but put ourselves in their shoes and feel it at quite a deep level. And then now we're taking on our own life plus these distressing calls. So you have to get to the point where you have to be intentional and have specific structure, specific procedures on what you need to do with support. Yes, it's amazing having managers that can see sometimes when you've had a difficult call, or have ad hoc check-ins like you had, Marius, and I've had good managers like that over the past as well. But it needs to be a bit more structured than that. It needs to be a bit more frequent. You don't wait, for example, to be unhealthy before you then start looking after your nutrition and start going to the gym. You know that, well, I should be doing stuff gradually. I should be looking after myself just because I know this is what's going to attain my physical fitness. We have to look at mental fitness the same way.
Okay, brilliant. Just anyone jump in and help me again. This is my naivety at play here. Does the turnover, does the emotional toil of working in safer gambling affect the turnover rates, just in terms of is it a shorter life span of people that can handle this sort of job, or I guess a little bit like Maris when she said she was only going to work in it for a couple of years. Does it have an impact on how long people stick around within this industry?
I don't know how many RG professionals I know that stopped working in this industry and started working in something totally different. But like totally different. I know someone who opened a shop. I know someone else who went back to university. It's just, I think the burnout is quite real. And I don't know what's wrong with me for still being in this role, but it's so common. And I used to say it's one of the few jobs that if you're doing your job properly, you get criticized for it. You have to keep that in mind. If you're someone in commercial and you're getting more money in, you get like real high fives and you're doing a great job. But if you're trying to minimize harm, and maybe not nowadays, more before, you do get like, why are you doing this? Do you have any ROI stats? Which always baffled me in the beginning. Like, how can I give you ROI if I'm working in safer gambling? Do you have any evidence? And constantly, like, you get questioned so many times. So I think it can lead to very much to a burnout. And I think all of us have gone through a period of burnout because it's a very tough job. You're constantly going against the current almost.
Kieran?
I've seen a fair amount of employee turnover over the years. To go back to the earlier question about what sort of supports people get, and I think that plays a huge part in burnout. When I was training with specialists, I would always be not grill them, but I'd always be very, very straightforward as to why are you taking on this job? Do you know what you're getting into? Because it's essentially cruel to put this type of work onto someone who's not fully geared up for what they're going to be getting involved in. And there is a degree of sense where you need to be empathetic, you need to be compassionate with people because of the harrowing, and people can be extremely confiding in you, comfort. But at the same time, you have to be prepared that will take a massive toll. But what I was always excited done is when I started, there wasn't any tickets necessarily, but I would always then try to be near the end. I would try to be the support for people. Like if they were having a really bad day, I would sit down and converse with them. I'd let them blow off steam with me. I'd take over cases and take them home. I'd be the help as best I could. But ultimately, as Mara said, I know plenty of people who have left RG and gone off to do absolutely anything but a rainbow by comparison to RG, because it does play each person. And it's really hard to forewarn people about what they're going to expect because you scare them off. I famously use a line: it's a job that fewer would do, and fewer could do. Because Martha, you're wrong no matter what you do. You protect people, they don't like you, and then you're fighting against the current of business opportunities and the business interests of, I see, fighting point out, do you have an ROI? Well, what's your KPIs? Are you making enough money? So I can understand why a lot of people try it for a few weeks, try it for a year or two, and then go, nope, there's easier ways to make a living. Hopefully now the industry's changed a bit like that. People are saying that there is more effort put into retention, upskilling, and appreciation for all these staff.
Thank you, Kieran. And obviously, it's one of those ones where you've got a lot of people that leave the safer gambling industry, and there's also people like you, Kieran, who leave but then get dragged back in and can't leave. You keep on coming, keep on coming back. So, Fraser, just on the last section, have you ever been responsible for doing the induction process of safer gambling staff? And are there elements that you think are sort of like non-negotiables when it comes to what should be included in, say, like the first month or 3 months? And, what would be your ideal induction of somebody who's relatively new to the industry?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point of view that the induction process needs to start at recruitment. Kieran hit the nail on the head when he said that sometimes you feel like when you're recruiting for safer gambling roles, you almost feel like you're trying to scare people away. And I take a slightly different tact with it. I think that many different types of people can be very, very good at safer gambling, but not many people can survive the front line for a long period of time. Now, the way I tend to test it during conversations at recruitment is that you tell them about a bit of a scary situation where someone might threaten to harm themselves or where they're experiencing severe addiction. And you give them a hypothetical about what if that call drops, is terminated, doesn't go the way you want it to go. How do you then sleep at night? And you give the person a minute to think about this, to process it and let it sink in. And the people that are going to survive in that frontline environment and do well are the people that come back and can accept that they cannot, with all the best will in the world, save everybody every single time. And the whole purpose of what we do in safer gambling is to make tiny changes to everybody's life that we touch. Now, what I mean by that is building this culture where everybody wants to help and wants to do the best possible thing for people. But ultimately, we can only do what we can. And we have to accept that if the customer isn't receptive to that, we need to take slightly more heavy-handed maneuvers, such as closing accounts, forcing timeouts, things like that. But you're always going to get situations where it's just an unsolvable problem. And I think it's really, really important, even at recruitment stage, to just instill that, but ensure that you're testing for it rather than just trying to scare them off.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a good point just to end that last section. And what I really want to do is just on this last part of the panel discussion is just focus on what safer gambling looks like in 5 years from now. I'll kick off with Maris. You can start us off. What innovations or technologies do you think will have the most impact or positive impact on safer gambling over the next 5 years? And I'm going to put a bit of a ban on AI, but you can say AI if you want to, but you need to be very specific about what element of AI and how it can impact if that is where your answer is going to lead to.
A skeptical one was going to go because sometimes I think that you have some operators which are really into innovation and they try their best. And then you have others that I don't think they will change much of their work in 5 years' time. Not to be a downer, but I don't have much trust in a lot of operators. I think, yes, obviously, AI is a major buzzword right now. So it's very difficult not to think that they will use some sort of AI. I think from an operational perspective, there might be more automation. So trying to get more automation when you're building customer profiles, when you're trying to understand the customer, when you're trying to detect, I think more work will happen with markers of harm, especially with what's going on with the SEN framework and everything. What I would like to see innovation would be more around the customer experience. So if I had to focus on an area that I hope that will be maybe more innovative would be why not try to do new safer gambling tools, things that that are not in the regulation. For example, give more customer ownership of what they're doing, give them more visibility, more availability. So if anything, if I would focus on any innovation right now, I would really focus on that perspective.
Okay. And Sean, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, slightly agree with Maris in the terms of I'm not sure how much will change in terms of support for safer gambling teams in the next 5 years. But coming from an optimistic point of view, I would hope that the biggest innovations won't be the technology. It will be a shift towards this awareness of holistic well-being frameworks inside, especially specifically in these SG teams, though it would benefit the entire organization. So we'll see safer gambling teams supported not just operationally, but from a psychological and emotional standpoint. The industry slowly, I think, realizing that you can't deliver high quality customer protection without a workforce that feels grounded and regulated and protected at the same time. I feel like this applies in all variations of human nature. You can't parent a child, efficiently, effectively, unless you first parent yourself. So you can't then support our customers unless we're finding a way to have a built-in framework, not just wait until people burn out, not just seeing someone's really distressed before we start, okay, maybe we should have a talk. It has to be ingrained into the framework of day-to-day practice. There has to be a set framework of, I've just had a call or a distressing call. This is what I'm now going to do. I have to do this. I have to take this time. I have to have this debrief with managers, whatever that looks like. And on top of that, what do I do on a day-to-day in general for my overall emotional resilience, my emotional well-being? These are the set times of the day that this is embedded into the work. This is during work hours as well, not just you go and take away and do this at home by yourself, which, by the time you get home, you're knackered, you got to deal with kids, you might have to cook, you just want to go to sleep. It has to be ingrained in the day-to-day practice of all businesses.
Kieran.
I'll come off mute. I have two, and I'm not going to take Fraser's steam, but we've talked about new innovations, technological innovation. But the one for me I would really love to see, and I think is long with, is recognition that RG staff are in fact specialized in the subject. I would like to see accreditation on proper industry acknowledgement of this is not a plug and play position. This is not something you can take someone from fraud, or you can take someone from cashier for a couple of hours and stick them in energy and say for one. This is a very specialized skill set. It is a discipline that requires proper training, proper background, almost akin to being a mental health first aider in a sort of D2C relationship. So that would be where I think the industry should really push is accreditation and recognition of the form of speciality of this subject matter. That's where I think it should be going, because we have it in other areas, we have it in other sort of similar backgrounds. But say the gambling staff, again, I know many operators, I'm sure the panel do as well, where people are given a day, 2 days worth of training and then said, right there, off you go. That's not fair. And then people are referred to as basically glorified customer service. They're not. We're specialists in our area. We should be recognized.
Okay, great. And Fraser, to close off.
Yeah, I think most positive impact on safer gambling is probably quite an interesting shift in the next 5 years. I'm thinking back 5 years from when I just moved into the online environment, and we were looking at, maybe we'll bring in loss limits. We just brought in kind of reality checks into the RTS and things like that the year previous. And I'm actually quite optimistic. I think the science has moved on incredibly in the last 5 years. I think in the next 5 years, with the advent of AI, I think it's actually going to push the boundaries quite significantly. Now, I'm not about to sit here and say AI is going to solve everyone's problems and everyone's going to be out of a job because it's going to do it better than us. What I think AI will help us to do and learn at a massive, massive scale is how we can personalize safer gambling tools and safer gambling operations, how we suggest tools, solutions to customers and automate that so that it lands at exactly the right time in that customer's journey, while they're on a spike, while they're on a dip, whatever it might look like, to make the most effective amount of uptake to reduce harm without it completely crushing the business. And I think we've talked a lot about what's your ROI, what's your KPI. I think in 5 years' time, we'll be able to actually turn around and say, do you know what, we've delivered X number of pounds of retention. And I think that's going to be the biggest innovation in SG in the next 5 years, is being able to just demonstrate that we bring value to the business and show how we've done it.
Okay, so an internal mindset shift from the wider company seems like a good spot. So I guess that feels like a good time to wrap this up. We're hitting on the hour mark here now for the webinar. So as moderator, I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for excellent timekeeping, of course. But what I really wanted to do was just thank all of you panelists for a really insightful and honest and valuable and just a thoughtful conversation that really gave me, as somebody who has very limited experience, some sort of insight into the work that you do on the front line of safer gambling. I hope this discussion has highlighted the challenges that both did exist and the progress that has been made, and the opportunities that do lie ahead in terms of safer gambling. Kieran, I just wanted to give you one opportunity, because I think what you're looking to do off the back of this panel session is maybe sort of like start up a LinkedIn group whereby we could have maybe a few more panels discussing the frontline experiences of safer gambling stuff. Do you just want to outline what you're hoping to build in terms of that?
Thank you very much, Jim. I'll keep it brief because it's the hour running on to the hour. So yes, I thought and I hope this webinar will be the start of a bigger conversation between specialists and other business units and other business relationships to look at the work that the actual frontline staff do and hopefully build the network. I've recently launched a LinkedIn group called Safer Gambling Professionals that is dedicated for frontline staff, managers, people who are actually engaging with customers, who go through the onboarding themselves, who deal with this stuff day to day. As Sean, if I can point out, the toll that's taken on the people who are living it every single day. Maris and I discussed something like this previously, and she's made a very great point about ad hoc engagements with staff every single month. I think that's incredibly vital. But I hope that this is the first of many specialized webinar panels for staff to speak about their experiences, speak about the reality of what they face, and to give not just the industry, but the greater public in the entire conversation a new perspective of specialists. We do have a voice, we do have an insight, we do have an experience and a position to take that could change the entire gambling conversation going forward, and that our expertise and experiences can be used for the betterment of everybody.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Kieran. So if you are a safer gambling professional yourself, I will put the details of Kieran's LinkedIn group for the specialists, and hopefully can start to foster a community of sharing knowledge and experience and stories like we have today. For those that are listening that want to connect with any of the speakers that featured on this panel today, I'll put all of their contact details, if they give me the permission, in the show notes. And that just leaves me to thank the panelists again for your time today. I really have enjoyed this panel session. It's been great to be part of the European Safer Gambling Week 2025. And thanks to everyone for listening today. I hope it has been informative and insightful for you. And who knows, maybe I'll see you in another discussion panel session soon. All right, thanks everyone.